Well, Happy New Year. I hope and pray you find this transition entering into 2025 restful and reviving. The fact that we are having church right now across our region in our homes is a testament to the fact that the church is not a place, but a people. It also is a testament to the fact that Jesus is the Lord of the Sabbath. That we can meet together online where we are is still very much glorifying to God. He's not looking at us with approval or disapproval for how we spend our Sunday mornings. Rather, he's just with us as he longs to be all day, everywhere we are. And we know this is the most opportune time of the year to reflect. Reflect on the year that was while looking ahead at the year that will be. We're sitting at this crossroads today. Every December 31st, we count down to midnight. I honestly don't know if we're counting down until we can close the book on the current year, or if we're counting down to open the book on the new year. Maybe it's a little bit of both. When you celebrate at midnight, are you celebrating the year that was, or are you celebrating the hope of the year ahead? Well, it probably sort of depends on what kind of year it was, doesn't it? You know, some of us, we're celebrating that the current year is ending. Maybe it was a tough year or a sad year, which may lead us to celebrate the hope of the coming year. You might be thinking that it wasn't the best year for you personally, and the hope of midnight on December 31st, January 1st, is the perfect line in the sand to get another shot, to start something new, or to restart something that wasn't working. Personally, can you think of a time that you got another shot at something that you screwed up the first time? You know, I've screwed up more times than I can keep track of. And whenever I mess up in my head, I want to have an opportunity to make it right. But on the flip side, sometimes I don't want that opportunity because I think I'm just going to mess it up again. You know, mess up once, it can be considered a mistake. Mess up again, I start to think maybe I'm the mistake. But regardless, when the opportunity arises for me to right a wrong that I've made, I'm grateful. And I try my hardest not to mess up the second chance. Try to think of a time when that happened, when you thought to yourself, I want a do-over. I want another chance. I want redemption. Whether it's getting a bad grade or losing the trust of someone because you broke a promise, maybe saying something you shouldn't have, making a mistake at work, lying to a friend or a coworker or your parents, maybe not making a big play in the game. Let's be honest, we're all grateful when we get the chance to make it right, if we get the chance to make it right to begin with. And when we do get that chance, we usually try a little harder. We put a little more effort into not messing up again. Truth is, we all love a good redemption story. So let me paint this story for you. The year was 2011. Many of you hear that year and you have very good thoughts and memories. You know what happened in 2011? Yeah, your beloved Cardinals last won the World Series. I say your because, as many of you know, I'm a Cubs fan. And it wasn't quite that long ago when I celebrated a World Series. You see, 2 of my kids have witnessed the Cubs winning it all, but have yet to see the Cards win it all. And some of you just turned off your TVs. Anyway, the year was 2011. And I will admit it was one of the best World Series games that I've ever watched. It was Game 6. The man's name was, David Freese. As many of you remembered, Freese played third base for the Cardinals. The Cardinals were on the ropes in a must-win game to keep their World Series chances alive. It was the 5th inning, and a pop-up was hit to Freese. It was routine, can of corn, easy as pie pop-up. And what's Freese do? He drops it. This led to the Rangers soon scoring and taking the lead. And it was at that point that Freese most likely wanted to go crawl into a hole never to be seen again. The Cardinals were losing. And if they would go on to lose this game, they'd lose the World Series. And Freese would have just been an embarrassing error in a bad game. You could even hear the boos in the crowd, which was probably deserved at the moment. For 4 more innings, Freese would have to think about that pop-up. But then he received a chance at redemption. And you can't script it any better. Bottom of the 9th, 2 strikes, 2 outs, 2 runners on base, down by 2 runs. I mean, seriously, Freeze is at the plate down to his final strike to lose the World Series after making a costly error 4 innings earlier. And what does Freeze do? He hits a laser to right field, scoring 2 runs to tie the game and send it to extra innings. But the script continues to be written. It wasn't over yet. Bottom of the 11th inning, and Freeze comes to the plate to lead off the inning, tied at 9-9. And what does he do? Go ahead and tell the person next to you what happens. Yeah, he hits a rocket to center field to win the game, and the rest is history. The Cardinals would go on to win Game 7 the next night to clinch their 11th championship. Freeze would be remembered as the hometown hero that saved the World Series in the most dramatic fashion possible. I can only imagine the emotional roller coaster that Freeze experienced that game. The ultimate baseball low of letting everyone down, then the ultimate baseball high of being the team hero. David Freeze was redeemed from a past mistake. In fact, no one remembers that dropped pop-up, or at the very least, you forgot about it until just now. But everyone will remember his home run forever. It's funny, as I was watching the game, I distinctly remember thinking when he hit that game-tying triple in the 9th inning, well, no one will remember that dropped pop-up now. Later, in extra innings, when the Rangers took the lead, I thought to myself, well, I guess everyone will remember that dropped pop-up again. Then, after Freeze's game-winning home run, again, I thought, never mind, pop-up erased from memory forever. Today, we're going to take a look at how the nation of Israel was redeemed. They messed it up again, and were redeemed again. We're going to see how God can and does redeem us when we experience life's distractions, disappointments, discouragements, and poor decisions that often come through our disobedience. The title of this message is, I Have Plans, because I do have plans. I have plans for the day, I have plans for the week, I have plans for the year, I have plans at work, I have plans at home, I have plans for my family, I have plans for myself. It's probably safe to say that we all have plans. But I want to remind you of something very important heading into 2025. And hear me on this, because this is more important than the plans that you have and the plans that I have. God has plans. Yes, God has plans. He's had plans since the beginning of time. He had plans in 2024. He has plans in 2025. Sometimes our plans line up with his plans, and sometimes they don't. Sometimes we ditch our plans to jump on his plans, and sometimes we don't. In the Old Testament, Israel was infamous for doing just that. Sometimes they jump on God's plans for their nation, and sometimes they ditch God's plans for their own. Back and forth this dance would go. Let me paint this story for you. It was 6th century BC. The Israelites were attached to their own plans for living, not God's. They had broken their covenant with God. They even pretended to worship God in the temple, but outside the temple, they worshiped pagan gods and practiced social injustice towards the least of these. They had pushed God to the side. Enter the prophet Jeremiah, the messenger of God's justice and grace. He would go on to tell the Israelites that because of their disobedience, they would be destroyed. You see, God had plans for his people, but they did not want anything to do with his plans. So they lived the way they desired. So Jeremiah said this in Jeremiah 25, 8 through 12. He says, therefore, the Lord Almighty says this, because you have not listened to my words, I will summon all the peoples of the north and my servant Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, declares the Lord. And I will bring them against this land and its inhabitants and against all the surrounding nations. I will completely destroy them and make them an object of horror and scorn and an everlasting ruin. I will banish from them the sounds of joy and gladness, the voices of bride and bridegroom, the sounds of millstones and the light of the lamp. This whole country will become a desolate wasteland, and these nations will serve the king of Babylon 70 years. Verse 12. When the 70 years are fulfilled, I will punish the king of Babylon and his nation, the land of the Babylonians, for their guilt, declares the Lord, and will make it desolate forever. This, in fact, did happen, and thus began a very dark period in the history of the nation of Israel. The Israelites were captured and made to serve Babylon. And they did indeed serve Babylon for 7 decades. There were many things that happened while the Israelites were in Babylonian captivity. Many of us are familiar with Daniel, one of the more well-known people in the Old Testament, one of the captives in Babylon, who worshiped God despite it being against the law. And we know what his punishment was, that of being thrown in the lion's den. You see, Daniel's plans probably did not include being tossed into a den of lions, but his plans did include worshiping God with his life. And we know what happened, right? Daniel would be delivered from the mouth of the lions as God used him to effect change with the king and nation of Babylon. That same year that God delivered Daniel out of the lion's den, Babylon would actually be conquered by the nation of Persia. And later on in the book of Ezra, we read what would happen to the Israelites under the reign of the Persians. If you read with me, Ezra 1 through 3. In the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, in order to fulfill the word of the Lord spoken by Jeremiah, the Lord moved the heart of Cyrus, king of Persia, to make a proclamation throughout his realm, and also to put it in writing. And this is what Cyrus, king of Persia, says. The Lord, the God of heaven, has given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and he has appointed me to build a temple for him at Jerusalem in Judah. Any of his people among you may go up to Jerusalem and Judah and build the temple of the Lord, the God of Israel, the God who is in Jerusalem, and may their God be with them. Persian King Cyrus allowed any Israelites that were held in Babylon captivity to return to Jerusalem to build the temple, to rebuild the temple. And you can read Ezra chapter 2 for a list of the 50,000 people who returned. It's really fascinating. We're just not going to take the time to do it right now. Now, if we jump to Ezra chapter 4, starting in verse 1, it says this. When the enemies of Judah and Benjamin heard that the exiles were building a temple for the Lord, the God of Israel, verse 4, they set out to discourage the people of Judah and make them afraid to go on building. They bribed officials to work against them and frustrate their plans during the entire reign of Cyrus, king of Persia, and down to the reign of Darius, king of Persia. So here you got the Israelites. They got so discouraged that they began to drag their feet. Construction of the temple got halted. And once again, they began to operate outside of God's plans. And this is what happens. You see, our discouragements can cause us to lose sight of God's plans. We may have grand ideals to follow where God is leading, but discouragements do undoubtedly come, which lead to second guessing and often fall back to our own plans. We start to question God. We will say things like, God, if this was your plan, why is it so difficult? Why are there so many obstacles? Why isn't this just really easy? The truth is, when you face discouragement in life, it's not a sign that you're not following God's plans. In fact, it could be an indicator that you are indeed following his plans. Discouragement is not always a red light. Sometimes discouragement is your signal to lean more into God and less into yourself. Because I guarantee you that if you set down God's plans every time you get discouraged, you're never going to pick them back up. Sometime during this period, God began to speak to the Israelites through the prophet Haggai. In fact, we're going to go over to Haggai chapter 1 and hear what Haggai has to say to the Israelites. It says in verse 3, then the word of the Lord came through the prophet Haggai. Is it a time for you yourselves to be living in your paneled houses while this house remains a ruin, this temple? Now, this is what the Lord Almighty says. Give careful thought to your ways. You have planted much, but harvested little. You eat, but never have enough. You drink, but never have your fill. You put on clothes, but are not warm. You earn wages only to put them in a purse with holes in it. And this is what the Lord Almighty says. Give careful thought to your ways. Go up into the mountains and bring down timber and build my house so that I may take pleasure in it and be honored, says the Lord. You expected much, but see, it turned out to be little. What you brought home, I blew away. Why? Declares the Lord Almighty. Because of my house, which remains a ruin, while each of you is busy with your own house. Verse 10, therefore, because of you, the heavens have withheld their dew and the earth its crops. I called for a drought on the fields and the mountains, on the grain, the new wine, the olive oil, and everything else the ground produces, on people and livestock and on all the labor of your hands. Sometimes we do get discouraged, but oftentimes we just get distracted from God's plans. The prophet Haggai is calling out the Israelites for once again being distracted by their own plans. I mean, he says things like, "You have planted much, but harvested little. You eat, but never have enough. You drink, but never have your fill. You put on clothes, but are not warm. You earn wages, only to put them in a purse with holes in it." You are distracted by your own plans. And this is quite funny, not really funny, because we often live our lives hyper-focused on our own plans, trying not to get distracted from them, while ironically, it could be those very plans that are distracting us from what God has actually planned for us. You know, we work hard to get ahead and to build a life for ourselves and our family, accomplishing the plans we set out to accomplish, not intentionally asking, is this what God has planned? We often even want to invite God into our plans. God, join me in what I'm doing. God, would you be a part of my plans? Haggai is telling the Israelites that their priorities are misplaced. You work hard, but you're working towards the wrong things, and there is no lasting payoff. All your work is satisfying yourself, and it's coming up empty. Now, because the people had not put God at the center of their lives, their work was not fruitful or productive, and their material possessions, it didn't satisfy. While they concentrated on building and beautifying their own homes, they neglected God. And there are many things that distract us from God's plans, but it's our own plans that can actually distract us from God's plans. Rather than asking God to join you in what you are doing, flip it. Ask God that you may join him in what he is doing this year. You know, that's a very scary prayer to pray because it very well may lead you to have to scrap your own plans. Now, there's one other big thing that I believe can derail us from God's plans. Discouragement, yes. Distractions, yes. But I also believe that disappointment can really take our eyes off of God's leading. Any given year, we face disappointment in life. Some years are full of them, and it's easy to allow that disappointment to cause us to lose sight of what God is doing in the midst of it. You know, his plans are far greater than any disappointment we face. And you will face disappointment this year. But God is in it with you, and he is working through it. Don't lose sight of that. In fact, in Haggai chapter 2, Haggai addresses some of the Israelites' disappointment in the newly built temple, because for many of them, it didn't live up to the expectations of the previous one. In chapter 2, verse 3, it says this, "Who of you is left who saw this house in its former glory? How does it look to you now? Does it not seem to you like nothing? But now, be strong. Zerubbabel, declares the Lord. Be strong, Joshua, the high priest. Be strong, all you people of the land, declares the Lord, and work. For I am with you, declares the Lord Almighty. This is what I covenanted with you when you came out of Egypt, and my spirit remains among you. Do not fear." Haggai, he encourages them that the temple may look different, but God is the same. And thus ends our little history lesson today of the Israelites being forced into captivity, released 70 years later to rebuild the temple in Jerusalem, to once again face discouragement, distractions, and disappointment, only to fully be redeemed by the God who had plans for them all along. Now, I want to end today by going back to Jeremiah. And if you remember, it was Jeremiah who told the Israelites that Babylon captivity was coming. It was the discouragement of all discouragements for the Israelites. But while in captivity, Jeremiah would send a letter to the Israelites, this time with encouragement. And this letter of encouragement is found in Jeremiah chapter 29, starting in verse 10. Jeremiah says this is what the Lord says. When 70 years are completed for Babylon, I will come to you and fulfill my good promise to bring you back to this place. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you a hope and a future. Then you will call on me and come and pray to me, and I will listen to you. You will seek me and find me when you seek me with all your heart. I will be found by you, declares the Lord, and will bring you back from captivity. I will gather you from all the nations and places where I have banished you, declares the Lord. And I will bring you back to the place from which I carried you into exile. Now, there's a really popular verse in there that is used a lot, isn't it? We know this verse, a lot of us. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you, not to harm you, plans to give you a hope and a future. And what a great verse that is, isn't it? We love to share this verse with people, don't we? We share it to encourage people, just like Jeremiah shared it to encourage the Israelites. After all, they are very much encouraging words from God to his people. You know, some people get bent out of shape when it's shared because it's taken out of context. Now, I don't think it's bad to share this verse with people. It's God talking to his people. But I do think it's great to know what this verse is in its original context, because it is a powerful original context. It's not just God saying he has great plans for us. It's God telling the Israelites this after he's put them in exile and allowed for their destruction. It's after the Israelites led a life of disobedience with their poor decisions and distraction after distraction. It's after the Israelites' sin that led to separation from God. You see, the history of Israel doesn't end in captivity. God redeems them and brings them back. And just when they think all is lost, God responds to them with those powerful words, I know the plans I have for you, which before those plans were destruction and exile. So perhaps when the Israelites read and heard this, they're thinking, like this can't be good. Oh, but it's good. I know the plans I have for you, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future, which, by the way, were God's plans all along, had it not been for the decisions, distractions, and disappointments of the Israelites. He goes on to say, you will call on me and pray to me, and I will listen. You will seek me, and when you seek me with all your heart, you will find me, and I will bring you back from captivity. I will restore, I will redeem you. God has plans for us despite our discouragements. God redeems us even after our disobedience and poor decisions. And God has a future for us despite our present distractions. Truth is, God gives us hope even through the disappointments we experience. And I love that his plans include listening to you when you call on him, revealing himself to you when you seek him with all your heart, and delivering you when you surrender to him. Wow, what great plans are those? You know, the Israelites, they were a redemption story. You and I are a redemption story.